So the first thing, obviously, to say that, as I think Ruth's already said, I do actually know Ruth from an event which we organised, because I'm actually half of something called RARA, which is Radical Aesthetics, Radical Art, which is this. So I just thought I'd mention that. Last year, basically it's a project run by myself and Jane Tormey, who we work at Loughborough University. We're both part of the Politicised Practice Research Group, so we've both got interest in art and politics and its relationship. And we invited Ruth to an event we had last year at People's History Museum. These are various things we've done as RARA, just to give you a little bit of background to that. Last year, in 2013, we did the Salford Art, Politics and the Pamphleteer, which was an event at which Ruth came and talked about a pamphlet collection, and it was really interesting. And we're continuing that project as well. So art, politics is something which I've had a continuing interest in, as also kind of countercultural groups in the 60s and 70s, which I'm not actually going to talk about much, really, but never mind. So I'm really pleased to be asked to talk about this, because as soon as she sent me the title, I was completely intrigued. I actually really love the idea of things which don't seemingly fit together, and to think about connections which are between things, kind of the serendipity of connections that you find, and then the kind of narratives that come out of that, I find really interesting. I've called this a bricolage of speculative parallels. So for me, it's really interesting because I'm interested in bricolage, that concept as a methodology for research, for practice, for life, actually, I find really interesting, and I've worked with that for quite a long time and done a lot of research around that idea, I think, hence that title. But also, I think, because this eclectic combination of the three things which she said, do you think you might find some resonance with this project in the email? And immediately I thought, wow, bikes, raves and caves, that's just so interesting. I'm sure I can find some way to find some really odd threads and connections. So that's kind of what I've done, actually. And the speculative bit, which you put on the website, you mentioned something about speculative, how speculative these disconnected threads were. That really appealed to me. So I like this idea of speculative parallels. And I thought it was a phrase which you'd use. When I looked back last night, I thought, oh no, you didn't actually use that phrase, I don't think. But I thought, right, I'm going to keep to that one because it's a really interesting idea. So what I've sort of put together here is really a thing which is a bit of a set of speculative parallels using, I suppose, Ruth's methodology, if you like, in which she's put this exhibition together. And there's a couple of things. So that's the first thing really I'll go back. Very interesting, this idea of speculative parallelism. And the second thing, I think, is the kind of politics behind the approach that is here. And I can sense the politics. And it's quite subtle, it's underlying some of the themes, and you have to kind of think about the politics which each of the things engages with in terms of the exhibition, and I find that quite interesting, because I think there's an underlying issue around challenges to private property, to capitalist property relationships, and a general problematising, I think, of the relationship of the individual to the collective. And I think that's something else which is really interesting, perhaps we'll talk about today. So the notions of group, tribe, community, collective, multitude, all those things. I think if we'd got more time, it would have been interesting to think about, or I might have thought about counter-publics and some of the issues around capital and its subsumption and how the local relates to global in terms of groups and capital and things. So they're all things which we could have looked at, I think. And also, I think there's something about contemporary folk culture was the other thing, which I think I might have looked at. And here I'm just thinking, it's kind of this issue that there's a conventional denigration of amateurism, the amateur and the enthusiastic or the enthusiast, which I think is interesting to think about in relation to, like, serious academics. And I noticed you described me as an academic, and I thought, oh my God, no, I can't stand that. But yeah, okay, I work in a university, it's an academy, and but I find that really problematic. I don't know what I am, but that denigration of knowledges, I find really, problematic. Who's to say whose knowledge it is? So I don't think I'm a serious academic, hopefully, too serious. And there's this whole thing, I think, about folk culture and social anthropology, which is, again, embedded in this exhibition for me, which is a very current thing. If you look at the folk exhibition, for instance, it's on at the Tate. I've done quite a bit of research around this person who you probably, I don't know if anybody's ever heard of, probably Barbara Jones in the 1950s. She did this fantastic exhibition called Black Eyes and Lemonade, which was full of the most bizarre things, all sorts of popular kind of groups and objects and things, jumbled together without any politics, really. The other person I think about in relation to kind of social anthropology and folk cultures, I suppose, is Jeremy Della, which I think, lots of his projects are really, really interesting, great projects. The Folk Archive, for instance, the Procession, his interests in all these kind of contemporary folk cultures, if you like, but also there's a politics around these, which are complex. I'm not going to go into them, but I think really interesting again. And just looking around this exhibition and thinking about what Ruth put together, it made me think about these two things, I suppose, this idea of speculative parallelism and this kind of bricolage and folk cultures. So there was just a couple of things I wanted to say, that the two things I think I'm going to just settle on a little bit are these, and this is my speculative parallelism, bricolage. Yeah, bricolage is something I'm particularly interested in thinking about. So what is bricolage? Well, I've given you a classical definition there. The notion of the bricolage, putting things together, doing it yourself, making do. So de Certo, I think, and also Levi Strauss's kind of definitions and ways of thinking about putting things together, I think is useful in this context. Because I think what you get when you put things together which are seemingly eclectic, seemingly disconnected, sometimes you get this delinquency on the edges of orthodoxy, if you like, and then new things do emerge. And I think it's really quite important to think about how that can operate. My own history in terms of bricolage, and this where there's a whole set of stuff I'm going to talk about really in relation to this, is my granddad was a rag and bone man, actually. So this idea of putting things together, doing it yourself, finding stuff and then working with it in a kind of makeshift way, and finding those odd things that you find when you just come across something which you pick up from the street or whatever, I think has always been part of my kind of culture and thinking. So this notion of bricolage, it's I don't treat it as an academic thing. It's something that I've thought about a long time. And in fact, I've got a kind of family history in it. Or that's how I feel at any rate. That actually is my granddad and grandmother, actually, in Sheffield. That's not, obviously, because I don't come from Brixton, as I'm sure you can tell. This thing about picking things from different places, it's got a kind of obvious relationship, hasn't it, to this notion of the rag picker. Sifting through things and then deciding what you're going to pick. And I think, I don't know, Ruth's just picking these three things. Again, she didn't say too much about how she first did this, but that, again, is really interesting to me, I think. And there's something I think about being resourceful, as an artist, but not just as an artist, I think just in life generally, that you can think about, how you act as a bricoleur all the time, I suppose, just putting things together. So this concept, this idea of just putting things together and the juxtaposition that emerges and the different meanings that emerge, I think has been constantly with me quite a long time. That's just an image of Bruce Conner in his studio in the 60s. Again, somebody who I've done quite a lot of research around, artists working in San Francisco, particularly in the 1960s, who worked with rubbish and picking things from the streets. There are various other examples. And I think the important thing here was potlatch, this idea of potlatch, again, going back to various kind of 60s ideas. It can operate as a kind of form of resistance, I think. So there's that subtle politics, I think, behind some of this. So that load of stuff really was about bricolage, and that one thing, I think, came for me from Ruth's show. The other thing is improvisation. So these two concepts have been quite important for me in my research, in my kind of way of working and thinking, and both in practice and theory, actually. This idea of improvisation, because, again, that strikes me as related to the notion of picking things up from different places, breaking down categories, not thinking about things being in neat boxes and classifying them in, either epistemologically, materially, physically, etc., philosophically. So improvisation and the the unpacking of that, I think, also came to me in thinking about what she was doing. And I think this is the thing about improvisation. It's about, you can have false starts, and the false starts, and then you start again, and then think again about how things relate to each other. Again, I could pick that up from the ideas of putting these three things together, I think. Yeah, that's Laurel Cox improvising in his skip. I'll come back to that later on, but I have been involved in quite a lot of improvisation because I'm involved in various groups and things with sound. This is though in Sheffield and in other places. Juxta Voices is something I'm involved in, which is like a 30 people anti-choir. We call ourselves an anti-choir, improvising with voice and sound. So as well as thinking about bricolage, putting things together and writing about these notions, I'm quite interested in practicing that as well. So I have a practice, if you like, which is quite multimedia, I suppose, but I've been involved in different aspects of thinking about improvisation and what that kind of represents. These are some of the groups I've been involved in. The one at the minute I've been mostly involved in is called Alchemy Schmalchemy. And there are three of us, and that was the thing we did at Bradford. And again, we're kind of interested in putting things together which don't fit. You can't tell from this what it is, so it's quite difficult to explain in a sense, but it's a kind of play obviously on the kind of authenticity of improvisation, which you get in the free improv crowd, the tribe, if you like, and the kind of sham nature of that as well at the same time, because there's all sorts of orthodoxies. So I think that boundary and that line between kind of authentic, kind of free playing and playing around, and the shadow of it all, which is really, there are all these kind of rules and things, which I think, we see in any of these groups, any cultural groups, I think is interesting. But we kind of play around with that quite a lot. But I'm not going to do that anymore. But it's about parody and pastiche and things. And also sometimes just daftness, complete daftness emerges, I have to say, from that project. And we're on to a fifth manifestation at the minute. So we've done things in Bradford and various other places. So adopting Ruth's methodology, I've just talked a bit there about two things. This is what I tried to do really. Bricolage and this idea of speculative parallelism. And then the concept of improvisation. The two things, I think, as the kind of concepts I pulled from the exhibition. What I want to do is really now just go through the three topics, if you like, and I wanted to put together my bricolage of my speculative parallels around these three things. So I don't know how this will fit with everything that we're talking about today. It's going to be it's obviously going to be a real mixture. Oh, perhaps I should say, that is actually my website. So I call myself Bricolage Kitchen. So bricolage is everywhere for me. But you can look at that yourself in your own time. So the three things, I've got kind of three sections now. I'm just going to talk a little bit about, spend 5 minutes on each of these things. Bikes. And I have to say, I've got a very long history of relationship to bikes and cycling, which is too much to explain in some ways. This PowerPoint is not, it was a PowerPoint, this is what I should explain. You probably have the same problem there. These should have come up one at a time, and then I was going to talk about them, and then you wouldn't have seen all four. And there's all sorts of other bits like that where we would have been dancing and everything, but we can't do that because we haven't got the technology. Never mind. So in fact, this is my house, right? So you would have seen that one first, because I'm thinking, we do a lot of biking. We've actually got 7 push bikes in our garage. That's the garage. You can't see it. Plus a tandem, I have to say. Plus 2 other bikes that don't work. That's in the kitchen, which if anybody's an aficionado of push bikes, that is an amazing push bike, actually. But I don't know anybody think sat there looking. I mean, I don't, because I don't know about the actual things, but my partner looks at that and he thinks, oh my God, this is just an amazing bike. But he actually got knocked off one by a car, I have to say. He finished up, they gave him the insurance, and he bought this amazing bike. So that's in the kitchen. And this is not posed. That's at the side of the bed, right? My bed. My partner's side, actually, because we have Ruler. Again, Aficionado magazine, Ruler. It's amazing design magazine on bikes. But this cycling. There is Rancière in there, but of course I thought I'd leave that off. I guess it looks a bit posing, isn't it? But cycling and racing and I don't know, whatever else. And this is the mantelpiece, which is a very weeny tiny set of figures, which was, we've had it 20 years probably. When we were in France, we bought them for the kids when they were quite little. That just happens to be at the back of them as something else, and that's a diary about bikes. That's a card I actually bought for Jeff, my partner, fairly recently because he'd done his first sportif. So like this bikes, and these two, and I've not, honestly, I haven't posed this. This was the two little badges because we go to France quite a lot, and one is from a Coresian cycle club, and the other one's, I can't remember what it is, it's something developed. So you can see, we have got a lot of bikes and stuff, and we have been keen cyclists for a long time. So this is it's a bit of my own kind of history. That's me in 1980. That's my jersey that I've still got that jersey. This is from 1979-80, when we spent every summer, I think, for about a month for 3 years on the trot, cycling around Normandy. There weren't many people did that kind of thing then so much. In fact, we went on a train because my partner was a railway guard and we got free railway passes. And the connections and the interesting bits carry on. But in the 1980s, I think it was a really interesting time. We were actually quite involved in a lot of politics, which I'll not go into the tribes and cults in that because it's incredibly complex. But we knew people who were in the Communist Party in Sheffield, Sheffield being a really political left place, always has been. And of course, people were in the Clarion Club, and there were some really interesting older guys that were still in the Communist Party that had been cycling around Sheffield in the 1930s in the Clarion Club. So there's a really interesting history there, I think. Which I'll not say much more about. But there's me in that very shirt, which amazingly I can just about still get on. And that was just a couple of weeks ago. So the interesting kind of historical connections, I thought, I've got to include this because the Tour de France has been in Yorkshire. I've never seen the Tour de France. We've been mad on the Tour de France for years. We finally got to Tour de France. And I thought, I'm going to wear my jersey that I've had 20 years. So there we are, that's my partner, because he's got another old shirt on him. So, I'm just making this point that the kind of cycling thing has always been there. But the political aspects of cycling, which I think are really, really important and really interesting in terms of the history of, socialism in relation to that, are also, really complex and have always been part of that. It's a pity the guy from Clarion Club isn't here, which I'll just... You perhaps didn't mention it, did you? Yeah, it's not coming, is he? No. Will you? Yeah. The reason I'm saying that is because another thing I'm involved in various things. The Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign, which is something to do with the miners' strike. We're trying to get some a public inquiry into the policing of the miners' strike at Orgreave. We had a big picnic thing at Orgreave in June, and the Clarion Cycling Club was there, and I was talking to a guy from it, and he said that he was telling me about the split in the cycling club, and that there is the political wing and the bigger section. I thought that was quite interesting. So, the sectarianism, if you like, in the politics of something like the Clarion Cycling Club, I thought would have been interesting to think about. Anyway, that's Tour de France. The other kind of things around bikes that does relate to some of my research, I suppose, on is the Dutch Provos in the 1960s, a group who were, some of you may know something about these. They were in Amsterdam, but we were incredibly interesting group which was very influential across Europe, just briefly for a few years, but had enormous influence after that, partly in relation to anarchism more than Marxism. But they were doing happenings and rituals and things in the city centre of Amsterdam. And of course, they're well known for this, the white bikes, which was, the original idea, I suppose, if you like, the blueprint almost for all the bike systems that we've got, free bike setups in this country and in Europe. They had this idea of the white bike plan, which was about stealing bikes overnight from Amsterdam, painting them white, and then giving them away. So, political context for that. Of course, the politics has dropped away from the thing that, we've got them in London now, and it's Boris that's put them there, and they've got Barclays written all over them, all the rest of it. But originally, this came from this anarchist group in Holland. That was their idea, along with a whole set of stuff about pollution in cities and all sorts of things. They had various plans. So I've done quite a lot of research around these. Interestingly, in 2010, a big collective of artists called NVA, some of you might know them, a really interesting group, they restaged this idea. They restaged the whole white bike plan, and I interviewed the guy actually back in 2010. So I thought I'd mention that again. And again, this is about mass. I think the whole idea of cycling and as a mass sport, that relates again to this thing about individuals coming together in communities and tribes and groups. I think that's in this, some of the ideas to think about in this exhibition. And I think critical mass and how they represent kind of direct action of cyclists together. And I've done I think it started in San Francisco, didn't they? In the 1990s originally. Again, that's really interesting. Politics, I think. It's about it's about occupying the streets, basically. So I think that political context for cycling, that's the end of my bit on that, I think. Okay, so I'm moving to caves now then. Right, that's a lot of different things there. Right, I thought caves, yeah, caves. And immediately I've got some odd things to say about this. The first really odd thing is, first cave, Fingal's Cave near Isle of Mull. Well, why is that important? And there's a bit of a political, this is again my autobiography, because this is what I've picked on, some things which I can directly relate to. I went in 1970 to a peace camp on the Isle of Iona. We went past Fingal's Cave on the Isle of Mull. I went for the school trip. It sounds really odd, but that has really stuck with me for many, many years. 1970, end of the 60s, the whole thing about people having a peace camp in this amazing small island it was a profound experience as an adolescent, as a teenager. But we went past this cave, and I thought, cave, yeah, Fingal's Cave. That's quite an interesting image and thing to start with, perhaps. But I'm not saying anything more about that. And then the other thing I thought was caving. Yeah, caves. I had the most hellish experience in 1973, when I was about 18, when a guy, working class, absolutely. So it may seem like a middle class sport, but it's not caving. A lot of working class people go caving, and that's a bit like cycling. The class aspects of this are interesting, I think. We went down Causewalk Cavern, which was near Eyam, and it was hell because it was about that big, the hole to get into it. You went down this ladder. We saw the hole. Thought, what? How are we going to get in there? And you had to climb this ladder. It was awful. But the politics of caving, I think, and again the class around that, because the guy who took us was quite a proper Sheffielder, shall we say. He had no gear on. He just went in shorts. He was black and blue. He got no proper stuff. We shouldn't have been doing it, really. But we did it. And it was like he was taking this cave. He was going to take this cave. He didn't care about that. So I think that kind of, that's kind of edgy aspects of caving and cycling are interesting. And because it's Cresswell Crags, right, caving, I've got other interesting connections. And this is this thing about making these connections, one thing after another, which is kind of what I've done in relation to what I looked at here. Because the nearest thing for me to go in a cave, having been down a pothole, is actually going down the pit, right? Cresswell Coal Pit, Colliery. And I've got a lot of connections to that because my partner's family were all miners. Some of them worked at Cresswell Colliery. Believe it or not, I've actually been down Cresswell Colliery. I must be one of the very few people who've been down a working colliery, because they've all gone now, they've all closed. Cresswell Colliery is no longer there. They're just obliterated from the landscape. I happened to work at Clown College, which is near Cresswell, and we were invited in about 1992, I think it was. Did we want to go on a visit down Cresswell Colliery? So actually down the pit, and we went when the men were working. And you can imagine it was just amazing. Of course, no one had any images or anything, but the experience of that was pretty powerful, particularly after a few years before there'd been the miners' strike, 1984-85, thousands of police, the enormous trauma in that village, and I mean enormous because it was split. The village, they weren't all on strike, some of them were working, so it was complex. So the politics of that, going down the pit for me was really, I related that to the cave and to Cresswell. I mean, there's many things I could mention about Cresswell. Another odd connection is that my partner has just finished a PhD on, believe it or not, the experience. It's an intergenerational ethnographic study of three ex-mining villages the young people, what's happened to the young people in those villages. And in Cresswell was one of them. He looked at the young people, particularly boys. Lots of them excluded from school, the terrible, derelict nature of life in those villages. And he called it Cragwell, which I thought was amazing. I just remembered on the way here. I thought, yeah, because of course in a PhD you're not allowed to use real names. You can't call it Cresswell. So we had to come up with something. So we came up with Cragwell. So we've got the crags, again there. So, yeah. And the funny thing about it is when I went down this pit in 1992, whenever it was, it's incredible. It's a really low pit. You have to struggle. You have to go on a paddy. You have to lay down flat on a conveyor belt for about 10 minutes. Eventually, you have to walk. It's a very deep mine. Then all the men were stripped off. It was like Dante's Hell, you'd have to say. But the pit checks that you're always supposed to hand in at the end, I actually brought it home. Oddly, I don't know how I managed it, but I couldn't find it. But I've got one somewhere. This is Shirebrook, which is not far from Cresswell. All right, 5 minutes. And this is actually an image of some miners who were shackled to a lamppost in Cresswell Colliery. So I think, for me, I couldn't not mention the colliery. I couldn't mention the coal pit and everything. And all these sort of things connect together somehow. And the final parallel, which I think is, I don't know whether you've seen that, Ruth, have you? Is that Cresswell Crags is actually on the NUM banner, the Cresswell Colliery, which I thought was amazing. I went, again, because I was involved in this campaign, this Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign. We went to the miners' offices, which is the Yorkshire miners' offices in Barnsley, and all the banners are in there, and we went, look around the banners, and that was on the wall, huge banner, and it's the original actual banner, but Cresswell Crags features right in the middle of it, which I thought was really interesting, because the kind of images and the symbolism of some of those banners is really often very powerful. But there it is, we've got the crags. Right, my last bit of caving, 5 minutes, all right, 5 minutes, yeah? A couple of minutes on caving, this appeared about a month ago, and I went to see this, which was, again, it's just an amazing coincidence. The cave. DocFest, Sheffield Documentary Festival, was showing Herzog's famous film about the ancient caves in France in the Peak Cavern, Devil's Arse Cave. I thought, I've got to go see that. And it was the most amazing experience. If anybody's not been there, it's worth going anyway. Because as you're walking up to the cave, I think it's the biggest cave in Europe, I don't know if it's Europe, in Britain. But these are the people. And we're watching the massive screen, which is about the ancient drawings on the caves in France, which is a fantastic film. But we're watching it in this ancient cave with the water dripping, the bats coming in and out at night. It was just incredible. And these are some of the drawings that are in the film, right? That's another image of the film as it's getting dark. And I did have a little tiny bit of second of video there, but you can't see it because I couldn't help it. I thought I'm going to have to take some video while I'm in the cave, taking a video of this film about a cave in a cave. It was amazing. Okay, so my last little bit is raves. So I've got some very, again, odd connections to this, I think. What's the nearest rave to early life? I thought, right, I started early life. What's the nearest to a rave at early life? Working men's clubs. Yeah, I spent a lot of time as a bit younger than 1970s really, but in working men's clubs because my dad used to go to all of them all the time. And they were pretty riotous, actually. That kind of captures it a little bit. I've had a long interest in kind of carnival and carnivalesque, and done quite a lot of research also on Welfare State International, which is a group who were in the 60s and 70s working in Burnley and Lancashire and all sorts of working class areas, if you like, doing street kind of performances and things. Yeah, and this idea of taking to the streets, I think, and the street as a stage, the idea of marching through anywhere you want to march, just taking it, it has a very strong political context, I think, to this. So I'm linking this to the idea of, the raves. And I've taken part a lot, because I used to be a trade union still a trade union activist, but I was an organiser for the Civil and Public Services Association for 10 years as a trade union officer. that aside, I've done many, many marches and rallies of various kinds. And I think it's the performative aspect of people out there together, massing, the choreography of it. And these are some of my images. And the silly signs, the things that people have put on the kind of banners, particularly recently. This was in London. The kind of jokers and the performative aspects, the kind of refusal to be serious, actually, is quite interesting, I think, more recently. Because in the 70s, the 70s, it was all deadly serious. But I think that's quite interesting as well. That's in Chesterfield. Yeah, that was in Sheffield. I thought, pro bono, what a weird sign to walk around with. These two guys in this particular day of action just got this thing, and it was a really bizarre sign. So, and obviously, taking to the streets, taking to the landscape and being in the landscape, like the ravers, Of course, take me straight back, got to mention that, mass trespass, Kinder Scout, that was the 1930s. So it's not an urban phenomenon, at all, is it? Protesting and being together in mass, I think. And the 80s in particular, I think, because the rave stuff was about the 1980s and early 90s. You've got this context again, going back to the miners' strike, masses, on all sides and all fronts in a sense. There's this kind of occupation by people. That's from Jeremy Della's thing. You've got the Berlin Wall and people en masse taking it apart. And then, of course, you've got, Occupy, which is a pretty obvious thing. So there's this idea of spontaneous action and activism continuing. People joining together cannot be stopped in a sense, although they are eventually a lot. And I was going to just end with that, but we haven't got video, so it doesn't matter. But this is a project that kind of brought a lot of these things together. Three of us curated this project, which was in Magna, which is a very huge old steelworks now. It's in Sheffield, and it's now a kind of museum. But it's very industrial. It's very gritty still. And we brought together about 60 improvisers from voice, sound, music, playing objects, and all sorts of things. And we kind of did this thing. We're walking through the whole place. And it was called Node Flow Mass. So again, this mass thing, I think, fits. Because that was the site of the 1980s and 1981, a lot like the 80s, 1981 steel strike in Sheffield, Hatfield Steel, massive picket. It's a massive picket there. So the project that we had kind of worked with the ghostings, if you like, of the masses of people that had been there and occupied that place in different ways. And it felt a bit like a cave, I have to say, because it's very dark in Magna. You can't tell at all in here, but there were masses of us. And it felt like a rave, a bit of a rave. So just a couple of last points. Right, just a couple of points. Yeah, mass, about coming back to this individual and mass and what we do together, what we can do on our own, what we can do together and in groups, and how we kind of work together socially and politically. And I thought it was interesting just to say something about this notion of the multitude, which actually, going back to the 17th century, is really interesting, the roots of the word. But I'll not talk about that, and that's from Hart and Negri. And then just one other quote I've got here, which is from their book Commonwealth, because I think there's something here, in the context of the exhibition again, about people coming together and in common. There's something about sharing, about a common, about commons that's quite important, I think. And the final point is this thing, I think, again, to come back to the methodology of the project, putting things together that don't fit together, that don't really seem to mean anything. That we need that because it breaks down orthodoxies around epistemologies, around boundaries of what way we think. And I think that can be very, very productive. And for me, even just thinking through these things that I've looked at, these three things, just spurred on by Ruth's shows, I found it really interesting because there's all sorts of messy connections, which I think I've found, which have meant something to me. Okay, that's it. And if you're a music lover, you might know that connection as well. You might do, you might not. Okay.